Okay, hello Cloud Gurus and welcome to this lecture. In this lecture we're going to look at some advanced load balancer theory, and really going into the exams you're going to need to understand the difference between cross-zone load balancing, sticky sessions, as well as what path patterns are. So why don't we start with sticky sessions, and we'll look at both classic load balancers and application load balancers. So classic load balancers routes each request independently to the registered EC2 instance with the smallest load. And what sticky sessions allows you to do is to bind a user's session to a specific EC2 instance. So you're going to stick a user's session to a particular EC2 instance. And this ensures that all requests from the user during the session are sent to the same instance. So why might you actually do this? Or what happens if your application is saving something locally on your EC2 instance? Perhaps it's writing a file or something, and you always would then want that user to use the same EC2 instance. And you can also enable sticky sessions for application load balancers as well, but this time the traffic will be sent at the target group level rather than at the individual EC2 instance. So that's all that sticky sessions are. You might wonder where it comes up in an exam. Well, this is a pretty common exam scenario. So you've got your user, they're trying to visit your website, it's behind, let's say, a classic load balancer, and essentially what's happening is it's just sending all of that traffic to one EC2 instance. And maybe you're an admin and you log in and you notice that no traffic is going to a second EC2 instance. How can you fix that? Well, you disable sticky sessions. So it could be testing whether or not you're going to enable sticky sessions or disable sticky sessions. Just look at the individual scenario. But essentially, if you've got an EC2 instance that's not receiving any traffic, you want to go in and disable sticky sessions. If you've got an EC2 instance or an application where you're writing to an EC2 instance's like local disk, then of course you would want to enable sticky sessions because you would need to have access to that file. So that's all that sticky sessions are. Let's go on to cross-zone load balancing, and we'll start with a scenario where we don't have cross-zone load balancing enabled. So we've got our user, we're using route 53 for our DNS, and route 53 is splitting our traffic 50-50 to two different availability zones, US East 1A and US East 1B. And in each of those availability zones, we've got a load balancer, and we can say it's a classic load balancer just for this example. So what happens then? Well, let's say in US East 1A, we have 4 EC2 instances, and in US East 1B, we only have 1 EC2 instances. Now, because we don't have cross-zone load balancing enabled, our load balancers cannot send traffic from one availability zone to another. So essentially what will happen is US East 1A will take its 50% of the traffic and send it to its 4 EC2 instances, and US East 1B will take its 50% of the traffic and send it to its 1 EC2 instance. So this means that your 4 EC2 instances are going to get 12.5% of the traffic each in US East 1A, and your poor EC2 instance in US East 1B is going to get 50% of the traffic. And so the reason for this is that your elastic load balancers cannot send traffic to another availability zone. So that is what happens when we've got no cross-zone load balancing enabled. With cross-zone load balancing, however, we've got our user, they're sending traffic to route 53. We've got a weighted routing of 50-50 across two different availability zones. We've got our load balancers in here. We've got our 4 EC2 instances in one availability zone and 1 EC2 instance in another availability zone. And our load balancer in US East 1A can send 50% of the traffic across those 4 instances. And our load balancer in US East 1B can send its traffic to the instance in its own availability zone. But then they can also do it across zones, and it gets very, very messy. But essentially what this means is that each of your EC2 instances is going to get 20% of the traffic because your application or elastic load balancers are sending your traffic across 5 instances evenly. So a common exam scenario will be you've got a user, they're using route 53, 100% of the traffic's being sent to a load balancer in US East 1A, and that load balancer is sending that traffic on to its 4 instances, which are in the same availability zone as it. And then you log into US East 1B and you notice that this EC2 instance is not getting any traffic at all. What should you do? Well, you should enable cross-zone load balancing, and that way it will get traffic because it's in another availability zone and you haven't enabled cross-zone load balancing. So that's all that cross-zone load balancing is, and those are the common scenario questions that you'll see. And then finally, we've got path patterns. So what are path patterns? Well, you can create a listener with rules to forward requests based on the URL path, and this is known as path-based routing. So if you are running microservices, you can route traffic to multiple back-end services using path-based routing. For example, you could route general requests to one target group and requests to render images to another target group. So again, let's have a look at a common exam scenario. We've got our user sending traffic to Route 53. 100% of this traffic is being sent to a load balancer in US East 1A. This would be a application load balancer because it's reading the URL path, and essentially it's sending its traffic over to two different availability zones. So let's say in US East 1A, we've just got all the traffic that goes to www.myurl.com. But what you want to do is you want to configure it so that traffic that is going to myurl.com/images is going to go over to your media EC2 instances, which is in a separate availability zone. So in order to do this, all you need to do is go and enable path patterns. That will then send just the normal path myurl.com to your 4 EC2 instances, which may just be web servers, but all the image traffic will go to a separate availability zone whenever you're requesting the www.myurl.com/images. So that's all path patterns are. So that is it for this lecture, everyone. We've just explored the 3 different things. So we explored sticky sessions, cross-zone load balancing, and then path patterns. Sticky sessions enables your users to stick to the same EC2 instance. It can be useful if you are storing information locally to that instance. Cross-zone load balancing enables you to load balance across multiple availability zones. And then path patterns allows you to direct traffic to different EC2 instances based on the URL contained in the request. So that is it for this lecture. If you have any questions, please let me know. If not, feel free to move on to the next lecture. Thank you.